We are live. What's up, y'all? We're going to give it a minute here before we kick off another Talent War podcast with you guys. Today's subject led by Fran. How does a leader learn to control the uncontrollable? Something that we're all dealing with in the COVID environment. For those that are filtering in, please, you've got a section where you can leave comments. We want to see what questions you have for this amazing panel of leaders. So please leave your comments in the comments section, whether you're coming in from YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Periscope. Again, we'll give it about 30 more seconds and then we'll kick this off, which means awkward silence for all the panelists just staring at themselves. Pressure. Good. All right, guys, that's about enough time. People will start filtering in. I'm Mike Sarraille, founder of the Talent War Group. We've got an amazing panel led today by Fran. Again, leaders must learn how to control the uncontrollable. And we all gather about 15 minutes before these kick off. And it's a great discussion with proven, seasoned leaders like Fran, Lisa, and the rest on here. And I'll do quick introductions. But how does a leader deal with fear and uncertainty? The battlefield is the ultimate mentor for this. There's two types of leader on the battlefield, an effective leader and an ineffective leader. No other type. And the effective leaders have a way to deal with the chaos and the ambiguity and get things done. They know how to prioritize what's important, focus their troops, and accomplish the mission. And we're dealing with this in today's COVID environment. This is the closest that business leaders have gotten. And today we've got a great panel, again, led by Fran, former SF officer, MBA, has held multiple C-suite positions in companies. Dean Stott, one of the most amazing humans I've ever met, my brother from across the pond. He was British Special Forces. That's as deep as I'll go. He was crucially injured on a training jump, which took him out of commission, but it doesn't take guys like Dean out of commission. He went on to break Guinness Book records, breaking the Pan American bicycle record. He is just an amazing human. And when you talk about mindset, Dean is my go-to guy, a mentor to me. A guy who means a lot to me, Dr. Chris Frueh. He is a renowned psychologist, as he says, a behavioral scientist. It was actually getting a little vulnerable here. It was Chris who helped me out as I transitioned out of the military and I dealt with that identity crisis. A guy who I consider a mentor, even though I will give him a hard time on the panel, no, it's all in fun. Steve Ward, who is an amazing SEAL leader. He was the Master Chief of all the West Coast SEAL teams, what we call the Group 1 CMC, Command Master Chief. He has a wealth of leadership experience and is one of the most humble guys, just not too handsome. And then I've got Lisa Jaster, an amazing soldier by way of West Point. She is currently a battalion commander, and Lisa hates when I say this, but Lisa, this is an honor that very few people will ever earn. She was the third woman to graduate U.S. Army Ranger School in the history of a 245-year institution. And not only that, she did it at the age of 37, just turning 38 towards the end. And then I got Michelle, who is a digital marketing associate with EF Overwatch, who's an up-and-coming leader who's joining us full-time. All right, I've run my mouth. Fran, I look forward to learning from you, brother. What do we got?
All right, thanks, Mike. Welcome, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to get in front of this group and be a part of this conversation and share some thoughts on what I call controlling the uncontrollables. And so we got to start with, what are the uncontrollables? And that depends on who you are and what you do. As a Green Beret, my uncontrollables were the enemy, the national military strategy decided by our senior leadership, the weather, the lack of food when I was in Ranger School and the Special Forces qualification course. As a college athlete, there were the other teams, my competition, the Olympic athletes who were around me, not only on my team, competing against me every day to be the best there, but on the other teams that we faced. And of course, the pain that was brought by the coaches 2 times a day, 6 days a week, year round. In the business world, the uncontrollables have been market conditions, the competition, compliance requirements, changing regulatory environments, other people's family situations that take them away from the team and the company, other departments in the company and how they view the same challenges that I do. Even my office location. And in 2020, as we've all learned, global pandemic, and how do we deal with an unforeseen thing like that? Well, why don't people think or plan about the uncontrollable? Well, that's simple. That's because we fear what we cannot control. And that's important to say again, is that we as people fear that which we cannot control. Everyone, every leader, every employee. And if someone tells you they don't fear the uncontrollable or the unknown, they're lying. They are lying to you. People react to fear and uncertainty in different ways. Fear and uncertainty cripple some. In fact, fear and uncertainty cripple many. Others embrace fear and uncertainty. In special operations, we call it embrace the suck. That's fear and uncertainty. You have to accept it, identify ways to combat it, and find a path to success. And the difference between those who crumble and those who fail, who crumble and fail, and those who succeed is knowledge and experience. There's two groups of people who face the highest levels of fear and uncertainty: special operations forces and small to medium-sized businesses. Special operations forces solve the nation's most complex and ambiguous challenges. They go to places, and most often their task is to make it better. Someone says, go here, make it better. And before you can even define how you're going to solve that problem, often we have to figure out what the exact problem is that has to be solved in the first place. Small to medium businesses are the backbone of the American economy. They're the greatest asset in our nation's tool chest, but they are the largest risk for owners and operators. All leaders go through a phase when they think they must control all facets of their organization, their team, their industry, their environment. Young leaders, middle management, senior executives all feel this at some point. If I don't have control over everything that's going on, I know nothing about what's going on. I'm a type A person. I think most of the people on this panel are. Type A people are the worst at this. They seek opportunity to increase their control at almost every turn. And a lot of times, type A people are obliged by those around them who are willing to give up control. But regardless of what you think you control, the reality is that you can only control the things that you have direct authority over. There's an ability to influence things that are supporting or augmenting that which we have direct control over, but there's nothing we can do about outside factors that will affect our life, our business, our team, our operations, the people around us. In the Talent War Group, we talk about the characteristics of high potential talent. 9 total: drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, effective intelligence, team ability, curiosity, emotional strength. But as we know, it's difficult, if not impossible, to get all 9 of those characteristics from a single candidate for a role. If you do find someone with all 9, there's no way you're going to get all 9 of those characteristics 24/7, 365 out of that person. So to control the uncontrollable, I believe there's 4 of those 9 that are critical: adaptability, resiliency, effective intelligence, and emotional strength. You have to be adaptable to adjust behavior to a situation. Have to have resiliency to persevere in the face of challenges and never quit. Have to have effective intelligence and the ability to apply your past experience and your knowledge to any situation that you're confronted with. And you have to have emotional strength and the emotional control in stressful situations to bring calm to chaos. These 4 characteristics are indicative of leaders who focus on planning and preparation. Because planning and preparation are the tactical things that a leader has to do to bring control to the uncontrollable and manage fear and uncertainty. But how do you focus on planning and preparation? Great leaders will say that plans mean nothing, but planning is everything. That's because it's impossible to make a detailed plan and execute it with precision for every possible factor that can influence what you're doing and what you can encounter. So what matters is the planning process, how a person, a team, an organization thinks about problem solving. the deliberate process and the checklist that they go through to identify the challenge that's before them, bringing that calm to the chaos, and then developing a plan. Sometimes that's long and detailed, and other times it's quick and just detailed enough to get the wheels moving and get out the door. But no matter what, that planning and decision-making process is the same. So where do you start? First, we have to understand our role. What do we bring to the organization? What are we expected to do? Often as leaders, especially as type A leaders, we believe we have to solve every challenge in the organization and fill every function. And if we don't do that, then catastrophic failure. And we forget that we actually may only have to solve one thing or one specific function, because that's our job, that's our role. That's what our department does, one piece of the bigger cog. Once we know our role, we have to define our core tasks. We have to list all the factors that we have to be proficient in to achieve those core tasks. Then we have to determine the internal and external stressors or factors that are going to be placed on us while we execute these core tasks. The composition of our team, the timelines, the operating environment, the goals of leadership, the quality of the product that we have. Whatever it is that's internal or external, it's going to affect what we're doing. And that allows us to identify what we have direct authority over. What we can influence because it touches our efforts or the surrounding things, those can be defined at that point. And then everything else is outside of our realm. That's the uncontrollable. All those things that you can't list there because it just has nothing to do with what you're there to do. With uncontrollables defined, that's when you can start planning and preparation. But that comes down to focusing on becoming as proficient as possible with what you can directly control. The better we are at what we can control, the more effort mentally, emotionally, physically that we can spend on what we cannot control. Our core tasks have to become routine muscle memory where precision execution is the norm. By doing that, the mental, physical, and emotional bandwidth can then be put on all those external things that are going to come in from all different directions. It's going to institute our planning process, and it's going to get us back on track to solve these things. And it's going to face that fear and uncertainty. All right, so that's my take on what the uncontrollables are, how you have to think about the characteristics that you have to employ to start facing them. We have a great panel that's joining me here today. I want to open it up to everybody and start getting their thoughts, and we're going to talk about a lot more detail than I've shared right here. All right, Chris.
Hey, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Chris is up.
Yeah, so I love I love what you say about the 9 characteristics, and I'd like to highlight 2 more that I think are critically important. Humility and curiosity, because for me, a good leader doesn't necessarily have all the answers, isn't to pretend to have all the answers, and is going to be humble about that. He's going to be prepared to do a little more exploration and listening, and is wanting to take that humble approach to situations that are uncontrollable, because they don't necessarily know what is about to happen or everything that will happen. So I think having a little humility and a little curiosity those are real strengths for leaders, especially in unpredictable, uncontrollable environments. I guess the one more point I'll make now while I have the mic is what we can control is often ourselves, our internal states, our mindset, our physiological arousal, if you will. So things like breathing, meditation, self-care habits are all critically important to leaders. Over.
Great, thanks, Chris. Lisa.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on this. If you see my very professional attire, you can tell that I'm currently at the hunting ranch. We just finished quartering a deer that my son shot with a traditional longbow. And I guess I'd like to jump right on the points that Chris was making is it's maybe not yoga and meditation, but if you've ever hunted, it can be a very anxiety producing event. Well, my son's 12 years old, and longbow or traditional hunting is extremely difficult. There's no sights, there's no anything. You can't control animals. Today, while we were sitting in our hide, the hide started blowing away due to weather. I mean, these are a lot of uncontrollables, and there's business application to this, but on a personal level, his amount of practice, going through how to breathe, how to slow down your heart rate, and knowing that you did everything you could to set yourself up successfully in a situation is a perfect snippet example of what we need to do, whether it's controlling the uncontrollables in the business world or controlling the uncontrollables in the military. And that's demonstrated in the military by rehearsals, by the crawl, walk, run stage, as well as in the business world. To use a similar business example, I'm the director of civil engineering at an engineering firm called M&S Engineering in New Braunfels, Texas. And I've got a lot of engineers who are really, really great at their professional trade. But something that's difficult to them is communicating their very, very complex theories to clients who just want something engineered. They might not understand the terminology. They might not care. They just want the solution to the problem that they have. And one of the things that we do quite frequently is I will sit with one of my managers before they meet with a client and talk through, hey, what's good, one good personal story that you can tell me right now that you can use to break the ice once you get there to get yourself more comfortable, as well as figure out your client's communication style. Okay, now explain to me what you're doing as if I'm a third grader, because if you can simple it down to that point, then you can get any client to understand it. And if the client comes back to you with more complex questions, then you can get into those. But as someone who communication might not be their forte, an engineer, controlling the uncontrollables, which is God only knows what those clients are going to ask or want at any given meeting, you have to rehearse what you can. You have to set yourself up for a comfortable situation where you can make it comfortable, so you're okay getting uncomfortable in a fraction of the discussion.
Yeah, just to jump in, I think first thing that a leader or anyone needs to understand is you cannot control the uncontrollables. And if you let the uncontrollables and fears run your life, and you're not going to move forward. So you do need to get out of your system that, yes, I can't control the uncontrollables. Great point, Fran, on planning. You always have a start point and you'll always have an objective. They will never change. The route in between, that's the uncontrollable. There's areas that you can control, which you touched that in your planning. So the best thing to do is have a plan. You always have a plan, otherwise you don't know where you're going to be going. Have that plan, but it needs to be a basic plan, and it has to have flex in the system. You need to be able to react to the situation. As you touched on there, the special forces, we're very good at this, because we would go into a country or a scenario where there is no infrastructure. We have an objective, but we don't actually know what the lay of the land looks like until we get there. And then that's when you get your intelligence picture. And as you start moving forward, you get more information, which then helps your plan. I also learn from the uncontrollables as well. The reason a lot of us are where we are in our lives and positions from time from the military is because we've had experiences which we could only get in the military world. So learn from those experiences and bank them. So should you encounter them later on, or you have another objective, another plan, you can factor that in. And I think that the best thing for businesses is to learn from these uncontrollables. And sort of the three questions are, what worked, what didn't work, and if we were in that situation again, what would we do differently? So don't be fearful of the uncontrollables. Take them on board, learn from them, and that will help you and your team move forward.
I just want to jump in really quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Steve Ward, because Steve can expand upon this. Hey, Dean, people just don't naturally deal with stress well. If they're thrown into one of these scenarios, we see it in the young SEALs, and Steve can talk to this because he ran training. I don't have the experience he did, but they'll make emotional responses based off the variables you throw at them. And when I say very, emotional responses, very human responses, like seeing your friend wounded in the middle of the street in training. What's the normal human reaction? Is I run to my friend. But is that the right response in a chaotic environment when your friend was just shot and the enemy hasn't dialed? They're going to have you dialed as well, and you're going to become a casualty, and you make the situation worse. But I really love how you said, don't try to control the chaos. And I remember a very good senior enlisted, and even Jocko, who Steve and I work with, and Jocko was instrumental in driving this home with one of his laws of combat. But he said, don't try to control the chaos. If you try to control the chaos will control you. You can't affect what's being thrown at you, but you can affect your response. You are in control of your response to all the stimuli that are being thrown at you. And I think that's hard for some people to understand. Or, another scenario is they suffer from the lack of information, and then they suffer from paralysis through analysis because they're only getting 40% of the operational picture, and they don't have that ability to make a decision. But Steve?
Yeah, hey, Mike, one of the things that I'm thinking through as everyone's, adding to the content here is you want a culture where people feel comfortable communicating with each other. And you don't always see that. You don't always see it in the military, and you definitely don't see it in the business world. You want a culture where people are open-minded, which requires humility. People should be able to come into a meeting and talk, freely about what they're actually thinking. And what we found out, definitely in combat is as a leader, you don't have all the bases covered. It's not always covered. So you need input from outside people that aren't attached to, what you're looking at. You want to stay in a detached kind of state of mind, so you can look at things from a 30,000 foot view. And one of the things we learned through going through our training pipeline is people always said, hey, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because they put us in scenarios where you're constantly having to adjust. You're constantly having to adapt to a new scenario. So that kind of gets bred in through a lot of people in the military. And how do you replicate that in a business environment? Well, you might need to do a little offsite and put people in an uncomfortable decision making process, right? And so what I'd recommend is coming in through developing some likely scenarios that might happen with your business, and putting other people that aren't actually leaders in charge of helping tackle those problems. And then through repetitions, they're going to figure out, hey, this is actually hard, right? This is what my boss is going through. But the more you can put people and leaders in a stressful environment to where they actually have to problem solve, the easier it actually is to problem solve when an event comes up, because they've been exposed to how to problem solve during a stressful event. And so a lot of times, especially in the business world, things are going hunky-dory in some of these businesses, and they're doing really good. Well, guess what? COVID just got thrown on top, and it's a very uncomfortable situation. You're having to go through and problem solve everything that's going on. So it can be very complex. And you want to peel back the onion and get to the core of the issue, and then start problem solving back from there, so that you have a realistic solution to the problem that you're dealing with, which requires a culture where people are open-minded. They're taking on input from everyone's different perspective to help pinpoint that. Mike, I hope that helps out with some of the dialogue here.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I mean, the point about culture is really critical in these situations, because you have to look internally at your team, and your team has to be composed to solve complex problems. So I spent time after I got out of business school leading global security for a major tech firm. And I got there at a point where the company had recently gone public, but the stock was on the way down. And over the course of about 12 months after going public and having an initial high price point on the stock, it started going down, and that created a tremendous amount of fear and uncertainty in the company. And that I led security, and I had literally security officers and members of my team who were more focused on the stock price and the value of their portfolio and their stock compensation than they were about what we were there to do. And that was to create an environment in which we protected the company and created the conditions globally for everybody else to come to work and go do their job. And so one of the first things that I did was go around and just start talking to everybody and feeling their concerns. And I spent my very first month, or I believe it was almost 2, where that's all I did. I just talked to every single person in the organization and said, talk to me about your concerns. Talk to me about your concerns in the company. Talk to me about your concerns that you have here on this team. And once you can start to unpack how people think through challenge, then you can start to develop a culture that combats that challenge. And so for us, it was the development of a core mission, a mission for our team that aligned with the mission of the company, and having that end state. So Dean talked about, having a start point, having an end point, and then having the plan. Well, that comes down to understanding truly what your mission is in that organization. And so once you can define that, and then you can get everybody aligned to that, dealing with these situations of complexity that are affecting you and everything that you're doing becomes a lot easier, because everything's always tied back to that mission. Everyone's always saying, okay, what do I need to come to work today to do in order to be effective to execute this mission, which then supports that of the entire company.
Guys, we've got a series of questions, and I'll just tee some up here for the group. We talked about it. How do leaders deal with the lack of information? And COVID was a perfect example of that. It seemed like things changed almost on a daily basis. We're wearing masks today. Masks don't make a difference tomorrow, and then now we're back to everyone wearing masks. So, as leaders on the battlefield, how did you guys deal with the lack of information? And I know some people call it like making a decision with only 70% of the picture. I mean, was that a learned trait? How did you develop that? And how did you make decisions when you only saw 40 to 70% of the operational picture?
Mike, one of the things that I find very beneficial when being the person in charge, whether it's on a deployment or, again, in the office, is really understanding the senior leadership or the company. So when dealing with rapid change or the uncontrollables or things like COVID, as a leader within a team, you have to have a consistent manager or leader to follow. So if you can know your boss's intent, that takes away one major variable, which allows you to focus on trying to close those gaps of the other variables. Yes, you might only ever have 70, 60, or even less percent of the knowledge of the current situation. But if you're not having to second guess what your boss wants or where the company's goals are or what the vision is. So if your management, or if a company's management or us as leaders can establish goals, targets, a mission set, then it is much easier to ask yourself the question, hey, is this something my boss would do, and does it move the ball down the field, or does it get us closer to mission success? So when I'm looking at it from a managerial point of view, or currently as a battalion commander who constantly has got 8 different companies right now in the military. Some are combat engineers. I've got combat engineers all the way to firefighters. And so I always have somebody in a deployment rotation, and they have to understand what my end state is, what my goals are, so that they can focus on the mission ahead of them, knowing that they're still in alignment with the battalion's goals and missions.
Hey, Mike, can I add in there on this? Hey, I think one of the things the military does really well is you're constantly in a training cycle, and you're being thrown a lot of problems when you're in your training cycle, especially if you're doing some type of live fire training event. So those leaders are put in a pressurized situation. You're only given so much information to make a decision, and you can't wait to make a decision on that. You're looking at what you have, you're taking on a little input, you have to make a quick decision. And I like what Chris Steinhilber had to say. As leaders, we always want 100% of the information, and it never comes in. It never comes in. So what you have to do is you have to look at the information you're getting, analyze it, and go, okay, is this enough information for me to make a decision for me, my business, my unit, to move it forward? And the more you replicate that, and in the business world, you got to come up with your own, idea on how you're going to, put people in a pressurized situation, your leaders in a pressurized situation. So you got to develop your own scenarios give them some information and have them go through the decision-making process. And once they do that a few times, they're going to be more comfortable with making decisions. We do it in the military, but it's typically during our training cycles, and it's just built in. So as a business leader, you got to figure out how to do that with your business. Whatever makes your leaders tick, throw some curveballs in there and see how people react to it, in a controlled setting.
Thanks, Steve. Chris, you want to comment on that and follow up? Chris, you want to follow up on that? Maybe.
While Chris is dealing with his microphone,
Okay.
we technical issues. We're going to get through this. Hey, one thing, two things actually, Steve, based off of what you're saying, what Fran was saying, is one, well, hey, that's great in the military. And we always hear this from business leaders. You guys can train all the time. What business leaders miss, and I think is part of like what's driven into them, is they think everything has to be this formal training program. Everything that happens on a business day to day, is a training opportunity. If Michelle is one of my young subordinate leaders and we conduct a phone call with a business leader, it's just simply taking 3 minutes to help her with a debrief and provide feedback. And the more she gets, more of that training, she develops into a leader, she sees more situations, she's more equipped to deal with them. So for business leaders, it's not that you don't have a training environment. It's just we use certain techniques in the military, like the after action process. We do it after everything we do. We take it very seriously. And sometimes it only takes 2 minutes of pulling Dean aside and saying, hey, I was your training instructor on that mission. These are the things I observed and the things you may want to take into account and maybe react differently on the next training scenario. The other thing, and again, I'll open it if you guys want to feedback, and then I'll turn it over to Chris. Business leaders think they have to make bold decisions during times of chaos. And I don't want you to think that on the battlefield, when things are at its worst, that we're always making bold decisions. Again, it goes back to only having so much of the information. I'm going to make like a series of iterative decisions. So COVID is a good example. If this is my team right here and we get information and I say, hey guys, based off the information that I'm seeing today, we're going to start heading left in this direction. And I'm not sure, it may change tomorrow, but based off what we're seeing, let's start moving left in small baby steps. And there may be contradictory information that comes in the next day, and I will look at my team and I will tell the truth and say, hey guys, I was wrong. Based off the new information that we're getting, we actually need to be heading right. And then the next day, if information changes and we're still heading in the right direction based off that information, I just continue to update my team with small iterative steps in chaos until we get out of the dark and into the light. But the other thing that leaders don't do is they think they have to paint a rosy picture. And I know for Fran, Dean, and Steve, and Lisa, in a bad situation, don't ever paint a rosy picture for your troops. Always tell them the truth and what needs to get done to get out of that circumstance. The second you start lying, that will erode your leadership ability. But Chris, let me turn it over to you, brother.
So I think, Fran, did you have a comment you wanted to interject there?
No, I was just going to say that, Mike, I think you're spot on. You have to maintain credibility with your folks, and that comes down to telling them what you know, but telling them what you don't know. And often leaders will think that they have to know everything. And just to your point where you said a leader thinks that they need to make every decision, they need to make it at once and then start executing down a path. It's okay to sit there and be honest with your team and say, we're going to go down this road and we're going to start here. And I don't know if I'm going to come back to you in a day, a week, a month, and tell you to go do the opposite thing that I just told you to do, because the conditions are going to change. And that comes down to that, not adaptability, but also that effective intelligence and just taking everything that you've experienced and saying, okay, this is one of those times where I have to sit here, and the best course of action is to honestly tell my team, I don't know all of these things. I know this one or two, and we're going to go down this road, and be prepared for me to change that. Still got to work just as hard. Don't do less, hoping that I might change it, but that may happen. So, Chris, thanks. Go ahead.
This is so important, and Mike and Fran, I love what you're saying here, and I'll just link it back to my sort of putting humility and curiosity forward. The arrogant leader is going to stride into the room and behave as though they have all the answers, and everybody else is going to see that they don't. So one of the things that I think we can go back to, what are the things we can control? What are the things we have within ourselves, within our domain to influence and manage and control? I think cognitive mindset is one of those. So, I mean, we all know a productive mindset involves things like being optimistic, resilient, compassionate towards others on the team. But I also think the effective mindset is to recognize the gaps in your own knowledge, the gaps in your own experiences, to be aware that there may be more than one possible solution to any given situation or problem, to be ready and willing and able to consider the perspectives of other people. And that means having that humility to listen and the curiosity, maybe even to ask the right questions as things develop. I think the productive mindset also views challenges not just from the leadership position, but from other perspectives, stepping outside oneself to see how do other people, how do my people, how do my colleagues, how do my competitors view this situation, and what not only what solutions can be made, but what negotiations can be found, what compromises might there be. Over.
Yeah, just to probably jump back, Mike, Fran, and yours, Chris. Is yeah, I like what you're saying there, Fran. Is you've got the information, you share that with your team, let them know what you know. But what a good thing is to do is also open it to the floor. As you touched on there, Chris, gaps in your knowledge. We, as a leader, you don't know everything. If you knew everything, you know, we wouldn't be in this position here. We'd be working somewhere else. So what I tend to do is I give that information to my team. Look, this is what I know. This is all I know. What are your thoughts? And I open up to the floor first. And the reason I do that is because you've got guys and girls from various backgrounds and had various experiences themselves. They may have experienced something similar to this. And then you bring their information in and then learn from that. But what you don't do as a leader is you don't give them your interpretation first, because a lot of them will just piggyback that. They'll just follow that because they think you have the right idea. So it's a great tool for leaders. In fact, it's presenting the problem to the team, stepping back and just watching their input. And you never know, the information that comes from that may actually change your plan. You may have seen something that you didn't see before. And it's having that humility to say, right, yes, let's go with that. There's a great book called Rebel Ideas, which talks about this, is using the diversity in your team and their experiences to formulate a plan. And I think Amazon do this. They do board meetings and the paper is turned down before they come into the board meeting. They don't even know what the board meeting's about, because you would have had time to sort of, have your answers already or ideas before you go into that board meeting. Turn in the paper straight away, you're getting their immediate reaction. And again, the guy or girl who's hosting the board meeting will not talk until they got all the information from the team. So it's a great tool for leaders out there.
Great, thanks, Dean. Spot on. One of the things that makes special operations great and just an amazing example of how team dynamics work is what you're talking about, that bottom-up input. As leaders, we've talked about a lot of different things about how leaders think they have to control the situation, they have to make all the decisions. Well, another area where leaders often think that they have to have all the answers, and you alluded to that. And what we find, and what is kind of ingrained in you in special operations, is that number one, you don't have to have all the ideas as a leader, and you're probably actually not going to have the best ideas or even any good ideas sometimes. And as a detachment commander, one of the first things that you when you walk into your team, they'll tell you is that you don't know anything. You know a lot about a bunch of different things, but these guys on this team have been around and they've been executing at a very high level for a long time, and their input matters. And so when you create an organization that has diversity of thought, solving complex challenges for the things that you can't control almost in effect becomes easier, because if you're sitting there at the top and you're the person in charge, you don't have to answer. You don't have to have all the answers. You have to be able to have the humility to look around and say, okay, who's got a better idea? Because I don't know. And taking that bottom-up input is always going to be critical. So, Chris, I think you have some questions for the group.
Well, actually, yeah. So a question for all of us here is, what is the role of failure in the leadership development process? How do we think about failure experiences? How do we learn from them and take future next steps as a result of failure?
What the special operations, and I know we're indexing on special operations, the process is designed to make people fail from the start. And that's why special operations, they're looking for a few of those attributes that Fran talked about today. And one of them is resiliency. Is special operations training is designed to make people fail. And for a lot of people that attend those special operations assessment and selection courses, I mean, there's Olympic athletes, there's NCAA 1 athletes, Division 1 athletes, and they've never really failed in life. And when you fail, the instructors sort of hone in on you. And as you get back up, they're there to push you back down again, just to see how you react. I know I'm speaking for the group, and I'll stop speaking, but you've got to reinforce in your young subordinate leaders that failure is part of the process, and they have to learn to love. They have to learn to love and respect failure, because from failure comes learning, and it makes you better. Anyone who ever tells you that they, in an interview, tell us about a time you failed, and they're struggling to identify a time that they failed, one, that's a pretty easy sign that this person lacks humility too. I could keep this group here for probably about 7 days straight, starting from every failure I've had in life and the embarrassment it's caused me, and how I've learned from that embarrassment. Dean.
Sorry, yeah. I don't like the word fail. I don't mean there's failure. It's an experience. So I always say take a positive from a negative. So the positive I've taken from this is an experience. And then when you encounter that scenario again, if you fail again, then you've not learned from that experience. So turn it into a positive. It's not failure. It's just the experience.
Lisa, you want to follow up?
So I want to jump on Chris's question as well. Yes, I do. I want to jump on Chris's question as well here. One of the things Mike mentioned earlier was that in corporate America, it's often difficult to identify those training opportunities. Unlike the military, we don't train, react to contact or any specific drill. In the civilian world or in corporate America, you have to find those opportunities. One of the transitions that I noticed was difficult with the teachings of the military into corporate America is, how do you allow subordinate leaders or junior leaders to fail? Because there is a real cost impact, maybe timeline, budget, reputational sometimes with businesses. And I think that's where people in corporate America sometimes lose the training lessons of the military. So I think part of failure obviously is learning from it, but how do we help our corporate partners understand that failure is actually one of the best tools to grow and develop moving forward? And I think so what is really, really critical is to allow our junior leaders to fail so that they're comfortable taking risks when they ascend the ranks in management. Specifically, I'm thinking of, I spoke earlier about a young engineer and teaching them how to talk to a client, or how to break the ice, or how to read the client and find out what the client's knowledge level is. And that's by telling stories, that's by having communications. Well, that young engineer needs to fail in a few of those engagements so that later on in the future, when they are a manager or they're now doing client management or even business development, they've got all those tools from the failures. Some of my best and most frequently used stories when I'm trying to connect to people in the business world is those exact failures, because I walked into a meeting where they wanted a muddy boots type project manager, and I came in a nice skirt suit or something fancy, or I go in and I'm meeting with jeans and t-shirt types of clients, and I'm completely unprepared for that. Or on the flip side, I'm meeting with the end item music client, and they're in the nice off setting, and they want to be wowed and bedazzled. And by failing earlier in my first years in corporate America, when I was with Shell Oil, I started to be able to read those clients, understand I need to Google the people I'm going to meet with. So I have an ability to break the ice. So I know whether they're the dressed up fancy type of client or they're the muddy boots. And so those failures are actually what taught me to work well with the types of clients that I have.
All right, thanks, Lisa. So fear and uncertainty in these controllables and uncontrollables, that's what it's the fear of failure. I mean, why are you scared, right? Why is there uncertainty? And it's because you have this fear of failure. Am I going to stand here and embarrass myself in front of my friends, my family, instructors, my coworkers, right, who are then going to look at me differently? And that driving force, right, allows you to then have to do one critical thing that we want to touch on, and that's it. You have to define what success and failure is. Once you define what success and failure is, well, then you can set the benchmarks that need to be achieved to do that. So I was a college athlete at Boston University on the rowing team, and there is nothing I have done since ever in my life, not in special forces qualification course, not in Ranger School, nothing that pushed me to the physical limits that being on a Division I rowing team did. And that was critical because every day you had to find your limit. You had to fail because failure is where you define your limit. And so whether it was putting in your mind that you were going to compete against yourself or the guy next to you or the coaches who constantly pushed you time and time again, multiple times a day, by getting to the point where you physically failed and couldn't raise your arm, couldn't breathe, fell off the erg, could no longer put the oar in the water because your legs, your body, your arms were so tired that you started to make mistakes, was where you identified those limits. And then where you could take a step back and say, now how do I push past it? How do I set a new limit that's farther from where I am right now? And that holds true in business too. Identifying from yourself, your team, your organization, what the limits are with the goal of pushing those forward.
Hey, Fran, we've got a question. I'll tee this up. I think Dean and Steve want to take this one. But Fran, the other thing we really haven't hit on is that true learning. And I know Rich DeVinny and Brian Decker, who are also part of the Talent War group, talk about this all this time. True learning only really takes place when you push people to their limit, to where they're uncomfortable. And I think that's something that business leaders need to understand, is that you don't want these safe spaces all the time. You want to apply pressure, help them learn from it. Apply pressure, help them learn from it. It's iterative. But the question from Chris, and Chris, I'm going to take a shot at your last name, Steinhilber. Chris Steinhilber. He asks, I hear people talking about failing fast as being a good thing in corporate America. You fail fast, fail often, iteration. Is this accurate, and is this acceptable? Dean?
I think back to my last one, failing, you fail once and then you learn from that. If you fail again for the same reason, then that's not acceptable. It's accurate in the fact that yes, you can fail, but absorb all the knowledge and information from that, learn from that, but and move forward. Hopefully, yes, there'll be other failures, but if it's for the same failure, then yes, that's not acceptable. So yeah, it's accurate and acceptable.
Yeah. Hey, Mike. Hey, so the one thing when I was, looking at that from Chris, is in my opinion, when I'm reading that, I'm kind of like, hey, if I fail fast and I fail often, if I'm quick about it before I get into an upper leadership position, then I can learn from it so I don't make that same mistake as I'm moving up up the chain of command in my organization. So there could be some truth to it. But obviously, just to your all's point, as we're talking through this, if you're failing as a leader on something that you've already failed on before, that is absolutely not a good thing. So when I'm reading this question from Chris, I'm taking it as, hey, I'm coming in new to an organization. I'm making some mistakes. I'm learning from those. I'm growing as a leader, and I'm helping move the organization forward by adding value from those mistakes that I'm learning from. But you don't want to get into no one wants to get into a leadership position and start failing all over the place, because that's not going to be good for the team, the organization. That's not a good situation. But we want to learn from our mistakes and continue to steadily grow and add value to our business.
So that's a good question about what does it mean to fail fast in the corporate culture. And so I think, to me, it's about iteration. And so we mentioned it here. And so when somebody says, in corporate America, how are we going to fail fast? What does that mean? Well, that means that if you have a product, if you're developing a technology, if you're manufacturing something, the faster that you can quote unquote fail, right, is where you understand its limits. It's where you really understand what that product can do and what it can't do, and how it's received in the market, how it's received by users. And that feedback is where you then take and you put it back into the product to make it better and iterate on it quickly. And so when you hear organizations like, tech organizations like Google or Facebook talk about failing fast, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about putting something into the market, allowing it to be received, and then taking that input very quickly to start the iteration process to make it better. And so did the initial product fail? Yeah, maybe it did. And sometimes that product will go away completely, and something else will come back later on. Or they'll just continue to iterate on it to make it better. So again, we want to define what that failure is in the corporate environment, and say, is this something that's just going away completely and it was just a big waste of money and effort and all that stuff? Or are we just iterating on it, making it better, and moving it forward?
Hey, Fran, I just want to go around the room, because this has been a great session, and really get the saved rounds if anyone has them. I will say, Fran, when you were talking right there, what I'm thinking about is, and Steve Ward and I have a colleague named Dave Burke. He was a Top Gun pilot, and he talks about the OODA loop, which was, as we all in the military know, was designed by Major John Boyd, a famous Air Force fighter pilot. Is that sometimes if that iterative loop, that learning loop, is faster than your competition, that's why they're saying fail fast, is you want to be quicker than your competition to get your product to the market space, or to the marketplace, to make the necessary changes that the customer has dictated they want. And so that's just one thought, and I know that's probably a completely separate episode, but any saved rounds from the group? Chris, it sounds like you got
Mike,
one.
I wanted to throw out one thing that I've.
Go ahead, Lisa.
Yes, sir. One thing that I've been pondering while we're discussing this is we've talked a lot about ways to control the uncontrollables, and I've taught military decision-making process, MDMP, to my company, both at M&S Engineering, and I also did it with my teams at Shell. And part of military decision-making process is trying to figure out the most dangerous course of action and the most likely course of action. Both things that, if translated appropriately, is how a business is going to deal with worst case scenario and what will probably happen. And I found the military decision-making process, MDMP, to be extremely efficient in corporate America, a way for young leaders to get, number one, their opinions heard, and number two, have an opportunity to start talking through potential problems before they face them, so that they can figure out which of the uncontrollables they can actually control. And that's all I had.
Thanks, Lisa. Chris?
So I guess my summary point, or my final point that I would make, is just to remind us all that our behaviors, our thoughts, our feelings, and our physiological, biological being are all interconnected. So we can have something go wrong with any one of those 4 areas, and that can cause problems in every other area. On the flip side, we can take an intervention into our thoughts, which we can, like we're talking about mindset, which can be learned, practiced, and developed, and that can have a positive influence on our emotions, behaviors, and physiological reactivity.
Thank you, Chris. Hey, and you all know who've joined us before that what's most important to us is that we're stewards of our experience. Our legacy of leadership is the next generation, and right now our next generation is Michelle. So, Michelle, what are the 3 points that you took away? Who won the thoughts of genius that stuck with you? The 3 points.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And thank you, everybody, for having me on this panel. I learned a lot today from everybody around here, years of leadership and learning. And so thank you. It was a pleasure listening to everybody today. First off, from the beginning, what I took from Fran's intro was that we fear what we cannot control. We all react to this differently. And something that stuck out to me from that was that you can either embrace the suck or it'll cripple you. We can't do anything about our outside factors. And I know he mentioned 4 characteristics that were very important, which were adaptability, resiliency, effective intelligence, and emotional strength. After that, I heard from Dean, which was you cannot control the uncontrollables. You cannot control them, and you cannot let them control you, or they will ruin your life. You need to have a plan, and you can't overcomplicate it. It needs to be a basic plan with flexibility, one that you can adapt to it. You don't know what's going to come. You don't know what those outside factors are going to bring. So you need to be flexible. And as Lisa said with her story, just know that you did your best and take pride in that. And then last was from Mike, who said, you can affect your response to the stimuli. You can't affect those outside factors, but you can affect your response. Everything that happens every day is a learning environment, and you need to love and respect your failure because it makes you better. I know he mentioned in an interview, if somebody doesn't have failures, somebody doesn't have a story of the time that they failed, that means that you're not learning from them, and you need to learn from them. And something that Fran said at the end that stuck out to me was that your failure is where you define your limit. So at the end of the day, it's a learning experience for you, for your career, and something that will only help you grow.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate everybody's time. Thanks for everyone who joined us today. This has been a great discussion about how we control the uncontrollables. We're passionate about this and a lot of other topics here at the Talent War Group, and we're appreciative of sharing our lessons learned and learning from those who joined us and learning from this group here. So thanks, everybody.